When Christian nationalists ascended the steps of the United States Capitol and roamed the hallowed halls of democracy, a startling reality quickly came to light. They were not who we thought they were. Many of us characterized them as radicals living on the fringes of society, fueled by their ignorance and bigotry. We believed them to live in rural America, listening to Rush Limbaugh, watching Fox News, keeping up with NASCAR, and attending fundamentalist churches. However, on January 6, 2021, we discovered that Christian nationalists actually lived down the street, coached Little League, and sat next to us in church. Former President Donald J. Trump so inspired them, they emerged from hiding in plain sight to unleash their theological and political ideas upon the world. For many, primarily white mainline Christians, the actions of January 6 were startling and surprising. While we have all grown familiar and accustomed to the rhetoric of Christian nationalists, very few surmised those words would lead to meaningful actions. Of course, there are a few groups who were not surprised at all by what's transpired. Brown and black people understand the real-world consequences of Christian nationalism. For centuries, within the mission of converting sinners to Christianity and establishing a safe society, church and state would often merge to achieve similar goals. The Christian church wanted converts and tithers, while the state wished for productive citizens and taxes. From the genocide of North Americans to Jim Crow, people of color suffered under the misunderstanding and misappropriation of the Great Commission when politics of the nation-state fused with theological justifications. The atrocities that have occurred under the banner of Christian nationalism throughout history pervert the gospel of Jesus and supplant it with a desire for conquest, conformity, and control. For me, there has been no more significant example of such peril than the Anglo-Christian nationalist encountering the indigenous peoples of North America. From the moment English separatists landed at Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620, Christian nationalists have been on the move to dominate both land and people. From that moment forward, Christian nationalists implemented a dual mission that brought church and state together to create the city on a hill, as John Winthrop declared in 1630. There were only two hurdles standing in the way of that dream: indigenous people and the need for free labor. Blinded by a preliminary understanding of manifest destiny, Christian nationalists chose to steal the ancestral lands of indigenous peoples, kill men, women, and children if they resisted, and enslaved Africans to build their shining city that was to be God's kingdom on earth. They did all of this as the chosen of God. We could discuss so much history in those early days of the American colonies and the Revolutionary era, where Christian nationalism flourished to set the stage for today. However, I want to focus on a few moments that are highly significant to me when I think about the dangers of Christian nationalism. Many of you know me by my name, Mitch Randall, but I have another name, Namu Kutsu, Buffalo. I am a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation. My ancestors lived for centuries among the green hills of present-day northwest Georgia and northeast Alabama before they were forced to abandon their homes so white Christians could settle in peace. In the 19th century, United States soldiers brutally marched my ancestors in the dead of winter from their homelands to their new home in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. As many of you know, it was called the Trail of Tears. Why? Because the number of deaths along the way mounted to thousands. As my ancestors tell the story handed down through the years, the loss of their lands and cultures was God's way of showing divine favor for the white man, or at least that's what they were told. After the U.S. and Indian Wars of the 18th and 19th centuries, a retired general believed there must be a better way to conquer the savages rather than killing them with rifles. General Richard Henry Pratt delivered a speech in 1892 at George Mason University. In it, he declared, "A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one, and that high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres." Pratt went on, "In a sense, I agree with that sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead." And then he concluded, "Kill the Indian in him and save the man." Pratt had already created the first boarding school for indigenous children in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The Carlisle Indian School was founded in 1879, with the second to follow in Chilocco, Oklahoma in 1884. The schools had a simple mission: erase all elements of indigenous culture from students and indoctrinate them with Christian nationalist principles. In Pratt's word, this would civilize the savages. Thousands of indigenous children from all over the continent attended these schools. Many were forced away from their families and relocated miles away. Other families were told this was the best for their children, especially if they wanted to succeed in America. Unfortunately, another reality was taking shape on the campuses. For the first several decades of the school's existence, administrators, teachers, and missionaries fully applied the Pratt doctrine with full force. The Merriam Report in 1928, named after Lewis Merriam, described the care of the children as grossly inadequate. In addition, Merriam used the term child labor in describing the manual work conducted by 10, 11, and 12-year-olds. And finally, Merriam described discipline as highly restrictive rather than developmentally appropriate. This simply meant that children received whippings that were not warranted for childlike behavior. While the Merriam Report conclusively revealed gross misconduct occurring on the campuses of the boarding schools, other testimonies convinced me that Christian nationalism was at the heart of this endeavor. Wrapped inside the Pratt doctrine were the Christian nationalist strategies of conquest, conformity, and control. My great-grandmother, Eloise Childers, and her sister Ruby were students at Chilocco between 1915 and 1918. Chilocco is located just north of Ponca City, near the Oklahoma-Kansas border. They were 130 miles away from their family in Broken Arrow. When the girls, ages 9 and 10, arrived at the school, they were welcomed by Christian missionaries ready to start their education. First, the girls were stripped of their soft traditional clothing. The missionaries replaced them with a blue wool uniform fashioned after the U.S. Army. Second, their long, beautiful black hair was cut and restyled. Hair is sacred to indigenous people, much like the Old Testament story of Samson. Third, they were forbidden to speak their native language, Muskogee Creek. English was the only acceptable language because their primary textbook would be the King James Bible. Finally, the girls were forced to attend church every Sunday without excuse. If they missed church for any reason, such as a cool swim on a hot summer day, missionaries whipped them with a belt. During their time at Chilocco, the girls suffered under the harsh consequences of Christian nationalism. It intensified when the principles of Christian nationalism succeeded in their objectives. Now, I understand that some may have a hard time accepting what happened to the indigenous people as a result of Christian nationalism. However, we must never forget the psychological and theological reason behind the conquest of North America. English colonists and Western expansionists believed that God chose them to fulfill a divine will. In their minds and hearts, their faith and governance was far superior to all else and had to be spread throughout the New World. So with that stated, I want to focus the remainder of my time on addressing three strategies I find within Christian nationalism: conquest, conformity, and control. After defining and critiquing these, I want to provide some suggestions on ministering among the rising tide of Christian nationalism within our modern-day churches and communities. Christian nationalism begins with the strategy of conquest. Christian nationalists interpret the Great Commission as an order given by Christ and obeyed by followers. While the exact wording, as you and I know, is to go make disciples and baptize, the spirit in which Christian nationalists receive these words is significant. Christian nationalists believe God has chosen them to fulfill a divine mandate on earth with eternal consequences. For them, the Great Commission combines the exploits of the Davidic kingdom with their mission on earth. In their minds, at least, God wants to create a divine kingdom on earth, using them to carry out the strategy and implement conquest. Whether through evangelical fervor or aggressive actions, the theme of conquest ignites the movement of Christian nationalism. People outside the movement are seen as targets for conquest. The indigenous peoples of North America are a prime example of this mindset. Native Americans were seen as potential converts to Christianity, but more so, they were seen as easy targets for their land. Therefore, they were characterized as a barrier between God's mandate and their obedience to that mandate. Thus, they had to be eliminated. If not eliminated, then Native Americans had to assimilate and conform. After a group of people have been conquered, the next step is to assimilate them and conform them to your systems and way of life. As God's chosen, Christian nationalists are called to institute behavioral conformity over others based upon a commitment to a skewed biblical worldview. Christian nationalists believe the outside world needs to conform to their belief system based upon their claim to be the torchbearers of truth. Therefore, efforts are made to create disciples, which look and feel more like clones of Christian nationalists. As was the case of the indigenous children at Chilocco, Christian nationalists attempt to strip away cultural identities and norms to be replaced with their specific worldviews and practices. Once conquest and conformity are achieved, then control must be established and maintained. Laws are passed under the banner of law and order. To legislate morals and values, define and dictate the Christian nationalism, these laws must be passed and obeyed. Any group of people threatening the status quo, usually people of color, are kept appeased by false hopes of advancement. If social and economic progress begins to occur by those people of color, then Christian nationalists will enforce laws based upon false claims and wrongdoings by opposition groups. If Christian nationalists are lucky, they can even get assimilated people to advocate for Christian nationalist ideas. While there are other markers and strategies associated with Christian nationalism, I find conquest, conformity, and control consistent within the movements throughout history. Thus, as our country watched in disbelief on January 6, in my opinion, insurrectionists attempted to implement this formula, and they are still attempting to implement it today. If successful, the gospel will be transformed into a tool for political purposes that will lead to authoritarian rule. Just think Margaret Atwood's Gilead. As I stated earlier, the most surprising revelation of the insurrection at the Capitol was not that it happened, because seriously, this is what Christian nationalists have been hoping for over decades. Still, the identities of the insurrectionists and their supporters caught us off guard. The people who stormed the Capitol, waving the American and Trump flags, carrying Christian signs, and shouting to hang Vice President Mike Pence, and also those who supported them from afar, are unfortunately not unfamiliar or unnamed. Those Christian nationalists and those who support them are our neighbors, local business owners, and fellow church members. Therefore, we have to discover a way to minister among them while at the same time making sure that Christian nationalism fails. I have some simple suggestions that are easier to vocalize than to implement, I understand. First, I think Christian nationalism needs to be condemned on several fronts. Even with the popularity of alternative facts and fake news, I believe most people are open to compassionate and rational evidence, especially when a compelling personal narrative is attached. For example, after telling the story of my great-grandmother at Chilocco, I attempt to parallel what happened to indigenous people to the tactics of Christian nationalism today. An emotional account rooted in historical facts often melts the heart faster than a logical argument will change the mind. Therefore, historians are in a unique position to confront Christian nationalism. Condemning Christian nationalism will not be enough, though. As uncomfortable as this makes many people feel, we must actively confront it on many levels. I'm not suggesting stooping to egregious or aggressive tactics, but I am challenging everyone to face it when they hear it and see it. For too long, peace-loving Christians have remained quiet about their opposition to Christian nationalism. While we have railed in our denominational echo chambers, we quietly denounced Christian nationalism in hopes of not turning over the apple cart. Folks, it's time to turn over the damn apple cart. Again, I'm not suggesting an egregious or aggressive offensive tactic, but I am challenging you to be more vocal and passionate about your opposition. The stakes are too high for us to let our fear of upsetting family, friends, and church members prevail. Just suppose that Donald Trump's presidency The theological heresy that supported him and the insurrection on January 6 did not motivate us to do more to confront Christian nationalism. If it didn't motivate us, in that case, the church and country are doomed. Now, I understand that condemnation and confrontation are nerve-wracking tactics, even though necessary in my opinion. However, my next suggestion very well might be the most difficult and rewarding one if we have a chance for a better future. We must cultivate relationships through honest dialogue, even when it means uncomfortable conversations and listening to untruthful remarks. The only way Christians of good faith will persuade hearts and minds in the future will be to forge relationships with people whose ideas we oppose. We must build trust because trust creates credibility, and credibility can change minds. Granted, I understand there will be individuals and groups that are not receptive to an honest conversation. I am not talking about engaging with those groups. It only takes a few minutes to recognize when you're wrestling with a pig in the mud, the pig is having fun. No, I want to steer us towards the individuals and groups with heartfelt concerns about the church and country. While their theology and politics lean supportive of Christian nationalism, they are open to conversations about honest faith and practical politics that make sense. In addition to engaging them personally, I also want to encourage you to bring a person of color or a person of another faith into this conversation. The purpose of this strategy will be to allow Christian nationalists to connect with people of color and other religions on a human level. When they hear the stories and concerns of others who are different from them, then the potential for humanization is present. If we can ever get to the point where we start seeing and understanding each other as fellow human beings, or as neighbors, as Jesus called us, then we have the opportunity for a truly peaceful and just society. The church and culture have made a lot of progress over the last 400 years in America, but as you know, we still have a long way to go. The wonderfully brave and joyful South African Anglican Bishop Desmond Tutu once said, "When the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, 'Let us pray.' We closed our eyes. When we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land." The indigenous people of North America could say the very same thing. Christian nationalism not only steals the land, though, it also steals the heart and soul of all people, Christian nationalists included. To accept the premise of Christian nationalism, one must set oneself above everyone else to justify conquest, conformity, and control. Not only must you dehumanize others, but you must also dehumanize yourself to perpetuate injustices. If Christian nationalism ever dwindles to obscurity, and I hope it does, then it will be for the reason that people of good faith were able to humanize all of God's children in the eyes of the other. May we continue striving forward to thwart the efforts of Christian nationalism while at the same time ushering a new tomorrow filled with grace, mercy, love, and hope. Thank you.